He thought I'd never read what he signed in my name. My name is Margaret, and I am 52 years old. I believed I'd done everything right. After my husband passed, I kept every file, every receipt, every paper that bore his handwriting. I thought order was safety. I thought family would honor that order. Thomas, my husband's younger brother, said he would handle the details. It sounded kind, even filial, as if duty had replaced grief. But I should have known better. The morning light spilled across the oak desk, smelling faintly of lemon polish. That scent always reminded me of our home's quiet confidence, of weekends filled with laughter and the clink of teacups, the sound of toast popping, the hum of the kettle, the warmth of mornings when life still felt whole. For a brief moment, I breathed in that comfort again. But something in the air had shifted. Silence no longer felt safe. I began sorting through the folders, fingers tracing over smooth envelopes. Beneath a pile of insurance receipts lay a document that didn't belong. My eyes caught my own name printed in bold, but the signature below was not mine. It was a perfect imitation. Same loops, same flourish, but the wrong weight of ink. My stomach turned cold. I knew that page. I had left it unsigned. The house creaked as though reacting to the discovery. The photograph on the desk, our wedding portrait, seemed to tilt slightly, the frame leaning toward the light as if listening. I whispered to myself, Thomas wouldn't. But I already knew he would. I opened the drawer, finding the faint scent of old paper and dust. My hands shook as I lifted another folder, bank correspondence, some tax forms, and tucked the forged trust document inside an envelope of my own. If he forged one, I murmured, there could be more. That thought broke something open in me. A vow began to form, not loud or angry, but cold and steady. I would know exactly what he'd done, line by line, page by page. I remembered breakfast tables filled with family chatter, Thomas at the head after my husband's funeral, pretending to lead with compassion. He'd said, "You can leave the formalities to me, Maggie." I nodded then, too tired to argue. I let trust carry me where it should never have gone. The sound of the old clock ticked unevenly, a heartbeat out of sync. The lemon scent that once meant comfort now mixed with something sour, a trace of betrayal under polish. I pressed my hand flat on the desk. He thought I'd never read it, I whispered again. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the handwriting in my mind, the way he copied the curl of my letters, the exact placement of my surname. How many others had seen it? Had a lawyer notarized it? My name, stolen in broad daylight, sitting quietly inside a file drawer. By morning, I decided to visit the county office. The mirror reflected a face older than yesterday, the lines around my eyes sharpened by anger and fatigue. Still, I brushed my hair into place and folded the document neatly in my purse. When I stepped outside, the air smelled of rain and iron. A neighbor waved, unaware of the storm that had already started behind my polite smile. The county building stood only 8 blocks away, but every step felt heavier. My shoes clicked against the pavement in a rhythm that almost sounded like counting, each beat a reminder that my name, my trust, my security had been rewritten without me. Inside the clerk's office, the scent of toner and coffee greeted me. Papers shuffled, voices murmured. I waited in line, rehearsing the question that had no safe way to ask. When it was my turn, I slid the form across the counter. "I need to verify this document," I said softly. The clerk adjusted her glasses, scanning the paper. Her brows tightened. She flipped to the second page, then to the back. The air seemed to still. "How long ago was this signed?" I asked. She looked up, hesitant. "This was signed months ago." Her whisper carried the final crack of certainty I needed. My pulse thudded in my ears. Everything around me, the fluorescent hum, the quiet rustle of paperwork, faded to nothing. Months ago, when I still trusted him, when I still thought my husband's legacy was safe. The words carved themselves into memory. That single phrase, signed months ago, became the first proof, the first wound, and the beginning of everything that followed. Every forgery leaves a scent, of ink, not guilt. The county records office sat 3 blocks from the courthouse, its lobby tiled in gray squares and its windows filmed with the faint smear of old rain. I took a number and didn't sit. At the counter, the clerk lifted her chin without smiling, a woman who had seen every kind of panic arrive neatly dressed. I slid the request slip forward, kept my voice even, and asked for the trust filings connected to my household. I didn't say why. I didn't say who. I kept my hands still on the counter, knuckles pale against the laminated edge. Within those first breaths, the building spoke to me in one way alone. The fluorescent fixtures vibrated overhead, and the stamp landed on paper with a dull, final thud, an enclosed rhythm that flattened hope. I felt the sound in my chest and waited for it to settle. Copies require a written request. She nudged a fresh form toward me, 2 pieces of identification, and the index number. I nodded, filled the blanks, and printed my name carefully. The stakes were simple. If I failed here, everything built in my home could be taken without my consent. I would not let that stand. I would not be erased. She read what I wrote and frowned. "You'll also need the filing date." I met her eyes. "I don't have it." A pause. "Then you'll need a search." I signed another line, then another. I completed 2 forms before she slid the window, closed with a soft click of certainty. Time slowed in administrative ways. The waiting bench was polished by years of anxious bodies. I paced instead, letting the ritual of movement keep my thoughts from spiraling. I checked the envelope in my bag, the forged document hidden inside a manila sleeve. The photograph from home, wedding day, bright blue sky, waited in the side pocket like a witness that had not yet been called. A guard with gentle eyes passed by, gave a small nod, and kept walking. I breathed once, then again. I sent a short message to the one person who had never flinched at bad news. At the registry, starting the paper trail. No reply came, but the act of telling steadied me. Paper is a patient hunter. So am I. When the window opened, the clerk's tone had softened by a degree only someone desperate would notice. "We can do a preliminary pull." She typed, paused, and angled the screen away. Not secrecy, just habit. "There are multiple entries. Same surname, overlapping weeks." The word overlapping landed like a hand on my shoulder. "I'll need to confirm which packet you're allowed to see." "Allowed?" It slipped out sharper than I intended. "Access rules," she said, "but you can request a verified registry copy." She slid a new slip toward me, stamped once, then twice. I kept my face level. "Make it official," I said. She stamped again. Ink answers to no one. I wrote the request, added a short line. Purpose: verification of signature authenticity. My pen hesitated before the last word. Authenticity. I underlined nothing. I pressed the page flat and handed it back. "Processing could take 14 minutes, she murmured. "You can wait." "Here is fine." I stood by the far drawer and watched people move through their own mysteries, probate, deeds, affidavits, each of us carrying a private ache in a public building. A child tugged a sleeve, asking for water. A young man, eyes red, clutched a folded certificate. I reminded myself why I was here. My consent had been removed. The law would teach it to return. The clerk returned with a thin packet. "Preliminary only," she said, voice low. "Do not quote me." She tapped a page near the bottom. My name appeared above a line I knew I had left blank. Beside it, a confident scrawl that did not belong to me. I watched the ink curve, the flourish pretending to be mine. The packet smelled faintly of toner and dust, but I refused to chase the memory of home into these pages. I looked only at what was true. "May I see the notarization?" I asked. She flipped. A seal? A date? A signature by a third party I didn't recognize. "If you want a certified registry copy, submit this and wait for confirmation." She slid a separate slip across the counter with a printed barcode and a small line for a receiving signature. I signed. "A certified registry copy, reference AXKZ, she said. "That's the code it will carry." There it was, one clean artifact, one thread I could pull without breaking the rest. "Thank you," I said. The words tasted like grit. She lowered her voice. "If what you're thinking is true, you'll need counsel." I nodded once, slow. "I'll begin where the paper begins." On my way to the exit, I paused at the drawer again. I pressed my palm to the cool metal and felt steadiness rise through my arm. A quiet vow formed, plain and serviceable. I will not let anyone write me out of my life. I tucked the preliminary pages into my bag and walked toward the glass doors. Outside, traffic moved as if laws always meant the same thing for everyone. The sky held to its gray. I turned left, set my pace, and kept to the plan. File the formal request, secure the certified copy, and build the record piece by piece. The stakes were not abstract. They were a roof, a table, a future. Ink won't own me. By the curb, my phone buzzed once. A single line appeared from the ally who always kept me grounded. "Don't confront yet. Gather first." I locked the screen. I could do that. I could be patient in a way that scared people who underestimated me. Back at the corner, I looked once at the envelope with the forged page, then at the stamped slip. One lie, one remedy. One door, one key. I didn't hurry. I didn't stall. I crossed with the light and kept moving toward what would come next, the packet safe against my ribs, the path narrowing into certainty. My name was now property, his property. He knew the time, because he stopped it himself. Harold met me that afternoon in the staff room, where the air carried the stale brightness of overused light bulbs and leftover coffee. The clock on the wall blinked noon, though it had been stuck there since winter. He motioned for me to close the door. I did, the click sealing off the rest of the office's chatter. "Before we talk," he said, "you should know, my watch stopped the same week that document was filed." He lifted his wrist. The cracked glass caught the fluorescent light. The second hand hovered between 12 and 1, frozen. It was absurd and perfect. Time arrested on the day trust turned to theft. "I didn't mean to find out," he added. "But I was in the room when Thomas rushed the signature packets through, said you'd already approved it." The hum of the overhead light deepened, an electric heartbeat. I stared at his face, pale with guilt and loyalty tangled together. "You saw him sign my name?" He hesitated. "He said you were too upset to come in, that he'd bring it to you later for confirmation." I closed my eyes, the sound of betrayal almost louder than his words. "And you believed him?" "I did," he whispered, until he laughed. "What did he say?" Harold looked at the envelope in his hands, creased from too much handling. "He called it efficiency." The word burned through me. I reached for the envelope. Inside was a flash drive and a printed note, small handwriting, the kind my husband used for reminders, not declarations. "What's this?" "Something I shouldn't have," Harold said. "A voicemail, recorded automatically through the firm's internal line. Thomas forgot the system logs everything." The fluorescent light flickered again. I almost imagined the ceiling lowering, pressing truth closer. I turned the flash drive over, reading the tiny label, reference VO17A. "You've listened?" He nodded once. "Twice. It's short. He's arranging your signature before you even knew the paperwork existed." Silence pressed in, thick and sterile. "Why tell me now?" "Because you deserve the truth before it disappears," he said. "But you can't tell him it came from me. Promise me that." I leaned back against the cold counter. My reflection in the vending machine glass looked unfamiliar, older, sharper, stripped of naive mercy. "He won't hear your name from my mouth," I said. He exhaled in relief. "Good. I'll transfer a copy to your personal account. The timestamp is 1432, recorded last March." Another number, another piece of proof. The light above us buzzed once, then steadied. "I used to think time heals everything," I murmured. "But maybe it just exposes what never should have happened." Harold's eyes flicked to his broken watch again. "That's why I stopped it, to remember the exact day trust ended." A strange quiet filled the room, neither peace nor safety, but clarity. I could almost hear the hum of the office through the walls, life continuing as though nothing had shifted. But everything had. I placed the flash drive back in the envelope and folded it into my purse. "If this goes to court," I said softly, "they'll need witnesses." He swallowed. "You'll have one. Just don't mention I told you." "Why?" "Because he still signs my paychecks." I nodded, the irony unspoken. The light's reflection glared off the metal doorframe as I stepped out. The scent of hot wiring hung in the air, faint but unmistakable. It smelled like something nearing its limit, one spark away from burning through. Outside, the hallway looked longer than before. I moved slowly, each step echoing against the linoleum floor. I had what I needed: a voice, a timestamp, and a truth frozen inside a digital box. The elevator chimed. I didn't look back at Harold. Some loyalties can't survive exposure. The doors closed. The hum of machinery surrounded me like a warning and a promise. Proof was a fragile light, but once seen, it couldn't be unseen. He said, "Don't ever mention I told you." Numbers betray faster than words. The banker's office smelled faintly of ink and cold air conditioning, that sterile scent of polished surfaces and withheld truth. The blinds were half closed, slats catching light in thin, cruel stripes. I placed the printed statement on his desk, aligning the corners with deliberate precision. "There are 4 withdrawals," I said, my voice calm because panic would make him dismiss me. $3 $200, $5 $400, $1,700, and $8,000, each within the same 2-week period. He leaned closer, tracing one line with his pen. "All from the same account?" "Yes," I said. "My husband's savings. The total, $18,300, ended up here." I pointed to a secondary account listed under Thomas's name. The line connecting them looked almost innocent, like a bridge built for convenience, not theft. The banker frowned. "Was he your cosigner?" "No." The word came out harder than I expected. "He was my brother-in-law, executor, not owner." The paper under my fingers felt ridged, the texture dry and fibrous, like the skin of an old truth finally exposed to air. I ran my thumb over the embossed header. "Account verification statement, reference CL29H." The embossed seal caught the light, a metallic glint of authority that made deceit look almost official. "Could this be a clerical error?" he asked. I watched the pen tremble slightly in his hand. "No, he's been transferring money under the pretext of paying maintenance fees. There were never any such fees." The banker nodded once. "You'll need to file a written complaint for the records." I had already done it. The form rested inside my folder, stapled, time-stamped, signed in black ink. I slid it toward him. "Here, filed at 2:45 this afternoon. I need acknowledgement in writing." He blinked, surprised. "You don't waste time." "Time," I said, "is how thieves think they win." He stamped the page. The noise echoed through the small office, a soft, decisive sound. That was the moment the balance of silence shifted. Walking out, I felt the first true tremor of power. I had entered this building as a widow trying to understand, and I was leaving as a woman drawing a line. Outside, the daylight hit differently. The reflection from the glass doors caught my face, older than I remembered but steadier. Across the street, a courier was unloading sealed envelopes into the bank's drop safe. One of them bore Thomas's business logo. My stomach turned. It wasn't just personal anymore. It was systemic. Later that evening at home, I unlocked the small household safe, the one my husband and I had bought after our first tax audit. Inside were old receipts, jewelry boxes, a family photo folded in half. At the bottom I found the ledger. Its spine cracked when I opened it, pages yellowed but neatly ruled. My husband's handwriting stopped abruptly in the middle of the year. Below it, newer entries appeared, ink darker, strokes sharper. Thomas's hand. 4 transactions matching the ones on the statement. Each line carried its own quiet violence. Withdrawal, $3,200. Reason, account merge. Withdrawal, $5,400. Reason, document processing. Withdrawal, $1,700. Reason, tax adjustment. Withdrawal, $8,000. Reason, estate transfer. He had written reason, as if the word could erase intention. I traced my finger along the indentation left by the pen. The texture under my skin felt like betrayal, wearing an accountant's smile. I turned to the last page, blank except for a faint pencil note. Balance confirmed, verified by T.A. T.A. Thomas Andrew. His initials where my husband's used to be. I shut the ledger and pressed my palms against the cover. "You took what wasn't yours," I whispered, "and you called it duty." The clock on the wall ticked once, then twice, like it was answering back. I folded the bank statement, slid it into an envelope marked Financial Record Reference AB07, and locked it back in the safe. A paper trail had begun, and this time I was the one holding the key. As night fell, the house seemed to exhale, wooden floors creaking as though acknowledging what I'd done. I made tea, though I didn't drink it, and waited for the phone to ring. It did, closer to midnight. I recognized the number instantly. My breath stilled. When I answered, his voice was calm, almost mocking. "You shouldn't have done that." The line stayed open, the silence behind his words louder than any threat. And for the first time, I didn't hang up. I let him hear what quiet defiance sounds like. They moved meetings into silence. The conference room sat at the end of a narrow hallway, its walls the color of faded parchment. No windows, no clock, only a long table and a single air vent whispering cold air across the ceiling. I had been told it would be a neutral discussion, a simple review of estate documents, nothing formal, nothing hostile. The word neutral is how predators describe their own comfort. When I stepped inside, Thomas was already seated, flanked by a man in a slate-gray suit, his lawyer. The man stood, smiling, extending a hand I didn't take. "Let's begin," he said. His voice was soft, too soft, practiced to sound harmless. The temperature in that room carried a kind of cruelty, sterile and deliberate. I pulled out the nearest chair, the metal frame biting through the fabric of my coat. The chill reached my fingertips. I pressed them together just to feel human again. He began speaking about procedural misunderstandings and documentation errors. Each phrase polished smooth, like it had been tested for loopholes before it ever left his mouth. "You're mistaken," he said, as though the word itself could rewrite history. "The filings were authorized with verbal consent." "Verbal consent?" I repeated. "From me?" He nodded. "Your brother-in-law said you preferred to keep things efficient." I felt the first flicker of nausea. Efficiency. That word again. His favorite mask. June sat beside me, her small notebook already open. The old paralegal had worked half her life inside rooms like this, defending people too tired to fight. She didn't speak yet, only watched. "May I see the records?" I asked. He slid a single page across the table, edges aligned with surgical precision. It was a printed memo, unsigned, dated 4 months back. At the bottom, the court's letterhead and one empty line where my name should have been. "This isn't evidence," I said quietly. "It's suggestion." He smiled. "It's how the court begins its understanding." Cold air moved again, brushing the back of my neck. The room seemed to breathe. Every time I spoke, the air conditioning deepened its hum, like someone adjusting the temperature to measure my discomfort. "They told me this was a discussion," I said, "not an ambush. No one here wants hostility." His tone slid into something like pity. "You've been under emotional strain. It's natural to misinterpret intention." Gaslight wears politeness like perfume. You only realize the scent is poison when it lingers after they're gone. June leaned forward. "Then you won't mind if she keeps copies of everything presented today." The lawyer's smile faltered. "That's unnecessary." "Necessary. June countered, is determined by record, not tone. For a moment, silence stretched between us, the kind that tells you you've stepped on something true. He gathered his papers too quickly, one corner snagging the edge of the table. We'll send a summary through formal channels. Do that, I said. When we stood, my chair scraped against the tile, the sound sharp enough to cut through the fake civility. I looked toward the heavy curtain covering one wall. Why hang fabric where there's no window? My breath fogged faintly in the cold air. I realized then the room was built for control, not comfort. Outside, the corridor felt warmer, but not by much. June walked beside me, quiet for the first few steps. They're setting tone, she finally said. Not truth. I nodded, the words settling heavy in my chest. Then we changed the tone. At the elevator, she stopped me. Next time, she whispered, record everything from now on. The doors closed, sealing us in mirrored stillness. My reflection looked calm, almost detached, but beneath the surface, something had shifted. I wasn't afraid of silence anymore. I was learning to weaponize it. Truth began clicking at 20 seconds per reel. Friday evening, the Riverside Bistro baked its noise into polished wood and glass. Thomas had chosen the place because it looked expensive and sounded harmless, a room where every conversation floated upward and vanished. I arrived early, and the host guided me to a corner table, cloth pressed flat, silverware arranged like a promise. Beneath the hem of my coat, the small recorder rested inside my purse, snug against a folded napkin. The ceiling fans hummed a steady backdrop. Sound held the shape of the room. He walked in casual, all teeth and comfort. "Good to see you," he said, as if the past weeks were scheduling conflicts, not crimes. He flagged the server with 2 fingers, already in command of the evening. When the waiter left, he leaned in. "Let's talk like family." Family. He used the word the way people use air freshener, so something sour won't reach the door. I smiled without agreeing. My thumbs found the purse clasp and nudged it open a measured inch. A soft click, then another, and the tiny reel inside began to turn. I counted breaths, quiet and even. Stakes were simple. If I captured his truth, I could keep my home. If I didn't, my name would live on papers I never touched. He ordered wine and a plate of olives, then sighed. "This has gotten messy because you misunderstood." "Explain it," I said. "Signatures were corrected. Everyone does it." He tilted back, amused at his own sophistication. "It saved time." "You mean it saved you?" His glass paused in midair. "You're emotional." "Or accurate." He chuckled, a dry sound that skimmed the tablecloth like a pebble. Across the room, cutlery chimed and chairs slid, a chorus I knew would mask the edges of his voice while leaving the center sharp. I angled my purse toward him, the mouth of it facing the space between us. The fan overhead kept its low drone, steady as resolve. He spoke again, lower. "You weren't ready to handle paperwork. I handled it. That's what you wanted." The arrogance arrived bare and unashamed, like a man stepping through a private gate. I let him keep talking. When men believe they own a story, they narrate the confession for you. The server returned, placed a small candle on the table, and left a folded card. I moved it aside. He watched my hand. "Stop being difficult," he said softly. "I need your cooperation." "For what exactly?" "To finalize transfers." "Which ones?" "Don't play innocent." The tempo shifted. So did my breathing. I let the silence lengthen just enough to make him feel it. "You were never practical," he said. "You turned paperwork into theater." "All I did," I said, "was read." His laugh broke open, careless and bright. The waiter posted a chalkboard near the bar. A couple at the next table debated specials. The clatter of plates rose, then settled. I thought of June telling me to record everything, and I could almost hear her voice inside the noise. Hold, then press. He leaned closer. "You'll sign what I put in front of you. You always do." I won't. Quiet, steady. You will. Try me. His patience thinned. Here's the truth. I'm cleaning what should have been cleaned months ago. He named accounts without naming them, spat out phrases like allocations and reductions, safe words that crowd out guilt. I let him continue, never prompting. A good confession needs room to pace. Look at me, he ordered. No. He blinked, startled, then smiled again. You said you wanted efficiency. I want honesty. You won't get that. 3 short lines landed like taps on a locked door. I kept my posture loose and my resolve exact. The fans throbbed gently. In that pulse, I heard what would matter on replay, the cadence of his certainty, the shape of a lie traveling its favorite route. I pictured the audio file sealed in a case later, labeled as an audio recording, reference VOQA, the timestamp printed clean, unafraid. The media contact waiting on my call had already explained admissibility in plain terms. Provenance, continuity, relevancy. Capture the sound of intent, she'd said. People underestimate how loud intent can be. I reached for an olive, bought myself a second to think. A question, I said. Careful. If you corrected signatures, who gave permission? He tilted his head as though considering the softness of the ask. You did? When? When it was necessary. That means never. His knuckles whitened around the stem of his glass. He looked down, regrouped, then changed lanes. We're here to find peace. Are we? We can be done in 12 minutes if you just sign. There it was, my first numeral of the night, useful and mean. I kept my voice level. You want speed. I want truth. He raised a hand. Truth is expensive. I'm prepared to pay. The reel turned on, indifferent to our theater. A vow sparked, small and fierce. I will not let your voice narrate my life. He finished his drink, checked his watch, and waved for the bill. The server set it down without a word. The evening had slipped into its last shape, and he didn't even know he'd built it for me. By the curb outside, the river air tasted metallic, the way city nights often do after busy dinners. He stepped close. You'll regret this, he said. I doubt it. 2 blocks away, a church bell marked the hour. My only other number, 7:30. I walked toward it, letting the rhythm push me forward. At home, I set the purse on the table and pressed stop. The room went still, then faithful. When I replayed the dinner, every grain of sound reappeared obediently. The fan, the chime of glass, his unguarded laugh, and the sentence that would nail the lid shut. Signatures were corrected. I saved the file twice, then called the media contact and gave her the recording's short description and the audio recording reference VOQA for her notes. She didn't celebrate. Professionals don't. Chain of custody, she said. Document it tonight. I will. We spoke briefly about next steps, then I ended the call and prepared the folder. On a separate sheet, I added a financial ledger, 4 brief lines already, confirmed from earlier statements, so the sound would meet its figures in one packet. Withdrawal, $2,100 transfer, $1,900 service fee, $3,000 adjustment, $1,000 total, $8,000 paper and voice, side by side, his habits matched by his words. I sealed the envelope, wrote ledger reference LDBQ on the tab, and set it beside the recorder. When I closed my eyes, I could still hear the fans and the clink of glass. His laughter turned into evidence. Faith carried lies farther than prayer. The first sign came on a Sunday morning when the pew beside mine stayed empty for the first time in 12 years. No whispered greeting, no shared hymn book, just a hollow space that hummed beneath the organ's low chords. By the second verse, I could feel eyes on my back, soft, pitying glances that slid away when I turned. Faith, I realized, can wound without ever raising its voice. After the service, the air was thick with incense. That scent used to mean peace. Now it clung like accusation. Someone had left an envelope on my pew, pressed flat against the polished wood. A faint floral scent leaked from its seal. rose and something artificial, a sweetness that tried too hard to disguise rot. Inside, one line in perfect cursive. "He says you're unstable." I folded the letter carefully, as if it might bruise if handled wrong. Outside, the church bell rang once, its echo lingering longer than usual, a sound that felt like judgment measured in seconds. By evening, the rumor had grown legs. My neighbor crossed the street rather than wave. The local grocer smiled too long, that careful kind of sympathy reserved for people thought to be unraveling. I could almost hear Thomas's voice rehearsing the story, his words coated with grief, concern, responsibility, the perfect mask. That night, I called June. "It started," I said. She didn't need context. "What happened?" "A letter, perfume on it, said I'm unstable." A pause. Then, "Faiths become theater, my dear. They clap louder when it's cruel." Her words were quiet, but I could hear the weariness behind them. She'd seen too many institutions confuse virtue with control. "I won't let him turn scripture into strategy," I whispered. "Then start keeping your own record," she said. "Every note, every whisper, lies need daylight." I stared at the letter on my desk, the rose scent still thick. "He's using faith as his lawyer," I said. "Then use truth as your sermon," she replied. The next morning, I went early, before sunrise. The church was empty, pews shadowed, hymnals stacked like quiet soldiers. I knelt not to pray, but to listen. Somewhere behind the altar, two voices whispered, the custodian and the clerk. I caught fragments. My name, words like confused and grieving, a story forming without me in it. I pressed my hand to the pew, the wood cool under my palm. "You've built your faith on rumors," I murmured, though no one could hear. The bell tower creaked above, the old rope moving before the hour. It hadn't been scheduled to ring yet. A gust of cold air slipped through the cracked door, carrying with it the faint perfume of last night's letter. I turned toward the sound and saw the smallest scrap of paper pinned to the corkboard near the entrance, a prayer request form, only 2 words written on it: "Help her." No name, no handwriting I recognized. For a moment, I didn't know whether it was pity or rebellion, but it was enough, proof that not everyone believed him. By noon, the whispers had turned into greetings again, half-hearted, uncertain, but cracks in the wall nonetheless. Still, when I looked up at the stained glass window, I knew the message wasn't over. The light passing through painted halos across the pews, each color fractured, imperfect. Faith looked broken, but still beautiful, and I decided that was enough for now. I left the church with the letter folded in my coat pocket, my steps slow but certain. Outside, the autumn wind carried the toll of the bell, deep, deliberate, final. I counted the beats. It rang once, paused, rang again. The rhythm didn't match the hour. The bell tolled, not for him, but for me. I mailed it with trembling fingers and perfect grammar. The post office smelled faintly of metal and rain-soaked paper. The clerk stamped the envelope twice, once for proof, once for permanence. Each strike echoed like a verdict. I watched the seal harden under the press, red wax cooling against pale parchment. My name, once stolen, now wrote itself into law. The texture beneath my fingers steadied the shaking that had lived there for months. I'd rewritten that notice 12 times. Every word had to hold its ground. No anger, no flourish, only fact. Forgery confirmed, unauthorized transfer, affidavit enclosed. Sentences like fence posts, built straight, unbreakable. I slipped the letter into the outbound tray, marked certified mail. And for the first time, the silence around me didn't feel like absence. It felt like armor. Outside, rain streaked across the courthouse glass, thin silver lines bending toward gravity. I waited for the drop box to clatter shut. 7 copies sent, 1 for each office that had ignored me before. 7 was a number that felt biblical in its patience. The arbiter, Judge Hale, had a reputation for quiet fairness. June said, "He doesn't bend to charm or fear." I'd seen both ruin better people. Still, I needed that steadiness more than faith itself. His clerk had promised a review within 7 days. "You'll get your answer in writing," she'd said, eyes kind but cautious, as if justice required a warning label. At home, I placed the receipt beside the recorder from that dinner night. Paper and sound, allies now. The clock ticked toward noon, each second clicking in rhythm with the weight inside my chest. I thought of Thomas, opening that same envelope, the letter that bore his undoing wrapped in civility. He'd told everyone I was emotional, but emotion never learned legal grammar. Every comma in that affidavit carried more restraint than his entire defense. I wrote it as if I were testifying to air itself. The phone rang mid-afternoon. June again. "Did you send it?" "Yes." "Good. Don't watch the clock this time." "I'm not," I lied. She sighed, catching the small tremor beneath my tone. "Let the silence do its work, Margaret." I turned the letter's carbon copy over, feeling the embossed court emblem against my skin. Raised lines, formal texture, the language of boundaries written in touch. It was strange how something so dry could feel alive. The last time I'd felt this sure was before the will was forged, when trust still had a shape. By evening, the air had shifted. The house was too still, but the kind of stillness that follows decision, not defeat. I brewed tea, the faint scrape of the spoon anchoring me in the quiet. The scent of lemon lifted through steam, warm and precise. Across the table lay the pen I'd used, a fine nib, black ink, no mistakes. I caught myself whispering, "This time, every signature is mine." Outside, the rain eased, leaving streaks of light on the window. I imagined him finding the letter in his mail stack, eyes skimming over the seal, heartbeat stuttering once, maybe twice. He'd recognize the phrasing. I'd learned his diction from years of watching him falsify authority with charm. He used to say, "The right tone can make any lie believable." So I'd borrowed his tone, calm, deliberate, irrefutable, and used it to end his performance. Night deepened. Somewhere in the distance, a train moaned against the tracks. I stood by the door, staring at the mailbox across the street. In that small metal box, proof and consequence were already colliding. The stakes were simple now. Truth had been mailed, and lies would need to learn patience. The next morning, the world pretended nothing had changed. The same gray clouds, the same hum of ordinary routine. But I could feel it, a hairline fracture in his control, spreading slow but certain. My phone stayed silent until dusk. Then a message blinked onto the screen. Unsaved number, no greeting. Just 4 words. He received it today. I looked at the screen until the letters blurred, the quiet between each pulse turning into something vast, like breath before thunder. My reflection in the darkened glass looked older but anchored, finally aligned with the truth I'd written. Silence held steady for one long, suspended heartbeat. Then it cracked. Static carried the apology that never came. The phone rang once, then again, an unfamiliar rhythm, too deliberate to be random. I almost didn't answer. Outside, the wind rattled the window pane like a warning. I pressed the receiver to my ear, and for a second there was only breath. Then the voice began, distorted, hollow. "Withdraw your claim," it said, each syllable torn apart by static. I didn't speak. Silence has weight. I wanted him to feel it. The line crackled, then hissed. I caught a faint sound beneath it, like a wire brushing against metal. He was close, maybe calling from a device that couldn't quite hold its signal. When I finally replied, my tone was steady. "Who is this?" "You don't want to know." "Then you shouldn't have called." The connection cut, leaving behind a low electric hum that crawled through the quiet. Sound filled the room, thin, sharp, alive. I stared at the phone's digital clock. 22:47. I wrote it down, the ink bleeding slightly where my hand trembled. Power can change hands without touching skin. That night, I learned it happens through sound, through who listens longer without breaking. By reflex, I reached for the small recorder on the desk. Habit now, Every call, every meeting, every silence, captured. I replayed the last 10 seconds of the conversation, amplifying the hiss until it became unbearable. Fear hides inside repetition, but so does clarity. The static was layered, artificial, probably routed through an old device. Crude intimidation, but still, it rattled something deep. June arrived the next morning, half awake and holding 2 coffees. "You didn't sleep." "I had company," I said. Her eyes sharpened. "Anonymous?" "Yes. They said withdraw your claim." She set the cups down. "And I documented it." "Good." She sat, pulling her scarf tighter. "They want you scared. That's leverage." "I'm done being scared." She looked at the phone, then back at me. "You think it was him?" I didn't answer. We both knew who had the most to lose. Thomas had underestimated what documentation does to power. It doesn't just preserve truth, it traps arrogance. I called the police by noon. Officer Jenkins took my statement without interruption. "Could be routed through an internet line," he said. "Hard to trace, but we'll log it." "Make sure it's attached to the affidavit already on record," I told him. "Date and time, 2247. Include my copy of the call log as reference entry PCL07. He nodded, impressed maybe, or surprised by how precise I'd become. "You've done this before?" Not until he made me. That night, the phone sat on the counter, mute and expectant. I kept glancing at it, waiting for another ring that never came. Every shadow in the room carried the outline of a threat. The hum of the refrigerator, the buzz of the light, all sounded like unfinished sentences. But fear, I realized, could be cataloged just like evidence. If you record it, it loses its teeth. Around midnight, I called June again. "Do you ever think justice is just patience dressed in pain?" She sighed. "Maybe, but it's still worth dressing for." Her voice steadied me more than the police report ever could. I placed the call log inside the folder marked Case File A2. My handwriting looked firmer now, unshaken. 2 exact numbers stood out against the margin. 2247 and 7. Both meant time, and both reminded me, time exposes what lies try to hide. The next day, I drove to the precinct to deliver the audio file on a labeled flash drive. The officer logged it with a new reference tag, then asked if I wanted protection detail. "I already have protection," I said. "It's called truth." He smiled faintly, maybe doubting me, but took the report anyway. Back home, I sat in the same chair by the window, staring at the coiled phone wire. Funny how something so thin could carry both threat and confession. I ran my fingers along it once, remembering the texture of the letter seal, the paper that started all this. Every step since had been about reclaiming what was taken, my name, my proof, my calm. When the clock struck 11, I turned off the lamp. The silence that followed wasn't peace yet, but it wasn't surrender either. I let it settle, heavy but clean, filling the space where his voice had tried to live. He thought intimidation would erase the trail. He forgot what I've become. He forgot I record everything now. They valued bricks, not memories. The man in the gray suit walked through my living room as if he were inspecting a stranger's house. His clipboard scraped against the doorframe, his shoes left wet prints on the hardwood. "We'll note this as jointly held property," he said, not looking up. I almost laughed. Jointly held? The words tasted metallic. He nodded, tapping his pen twice. "That's what the record shows." I watched the morning light filter through the blinds, striping the family photos on the mantel. Faces, smiles, frozen in time. The beam landed squarely on the frame from 2003, the year before Thomas started rearranging documents. Light, I thought, could expose and wound at the same time. When the appraiser left, silence moved in, the kind that listens. I pulled the deed folder from the cabinet and laid it flat across the kitchen table. The paper had grown soft around the edges from years of handling. There it was, our names printed together, his forged initial curling neatly beside mine. Same ink, but not my pen. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. Memory collided with evidence, and suddenly the house didn't feel like safety. It felt like testimony waiting to be sworn in. I called my ally, the gatekeeper, the only one who hadn't doubted me when the letters began. He was a notary by trade, but his strength was in precision. "Bring it here," he said. "We'll verify the signature placement against your prior filings." By afternoon, I was sitting across from him in his small office, the smell of paper and coffee grounding the air. He adjusted his glasses and compared signatures, eyes narrowing. "See the tilt?" he said, pointing with the edge of his ruler. "Yours leans left. His leans right. This mark, this hybrid, it's imitation." How long would something like this take to prove? 7 days, maybe less, he replied, if the court's calendar doesn't delay. 7 days, the same time frame Judge Hale had given for the affidavit review. Coincidence had long stopped existing in my story. He pulled out a seal, pressed it firmly into the page, and handed me the notarized statement. "This locks the record," he said. "No more quiet revisions." I ran my hand over the embossed mark, feeling its raised texture catch under my fingertips. Texture again, proof in touch, not trust. "He thought the paper would protect him," I murmured. The gatekeeper looked up. "It never protects the guilty. It just delays them." Outside, the late afternoon sun cut through his office window, light bouncing off the metal keychain that hung near the door. It glimmered briefly before settling, a small, silent vow. I thought of the key to my house still hanging by the kitchen entrance, the same key I'd carried for 22 years. I'd turned it in joy, in exhaustion, in mourning. Now it represented something else entirely. Ownership reclaimed. When I returned home, I unlocked the door slowly, the latch catching twice before releasing. The house smelled faintly of dust and lemon polish. I walked to the window, pulling the blinds open wide. Light spilled across the room like confession, finding every imperfection in the paint, every faded mark from lives once lived here honestly. I set the notarized deed on the table beside the family photo. The paper gleamed faintly where the embossed seal caught the sunlight. "You wanted to erase me," I whispered. "But the house remembers." June called as twilight pressed against the glass. "Did the appraiser finish?" "Yes, they said jointly held." A pause, then quietly, "He's making his final moves." "Good," I said. "So am I." I could hear her smile through the line. "The gatekeeper trusts the evidence?" "He does, and the house will back me up." She exhaled. "Then hold steady. He's counting on fatigue." "I'm counting on truth." When I hung up, the first star had appeared through the open window, faint, patient, but visible. I left the lights off, letting the evening claim the room. The stakes had never been clearer. If he could rewrite a deed, he could erase a life. But not mine, not anymore. I locked the front door, turned the key once, then placed it on the table beside the sealed document. The sound was small but final, like punctuation at the end of a confession. The house stood quiet around me, its walls listening, its air holding the weight of every vow I'd ever broken and every one I was about to keep. The house would testify for me. The courtroom smelled of varnish and sweat. The scent clung to the air like a warning. Polish and nerves mixing under fluorescent light. The benches were full, every seat a silent witness. I felt the weight of 50 eyes behind me and one gaze I refused to meet ahead. The gavel rested idle, its shadow stretching across the bench like a threat waiting for formality. Judge Hale entered, precise as always, his robe folding sharply as he sat. The clerk called the case, the echo bouncing off wood and glass. My pulse kept time with the quiet shuffling of papers. Truth, I thought, has its own kind of heartbeat. "Mrs." He caught himself correcting. "The claimant will proceed." The title stung less than I'd expected. I rose, hands steady despite the tremor underneath. "Your Honor," I began, voice low but even, "this submission contains audio evidence, recorded on the night of April 14th. I slid the recorder forward, its small frame unassuming on the polished table, and a transcript certified under reference entry T7A. The clerk nodded, pressing play. At first, just static. Then laughter. Then his voice, calm, careless, familiar. "You can fake any mark if you control the pen." The crowd stirred. Whispers rolled like small waves. Someone gasped, "That's her voice," when mine followed, me asking him, why? He'd done it. Another murmur. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp and clean. Order. The sound cut through me, but it wasn't fear. It was punctuation. Thomas sat at the defense table, shoulders rigid, chin high. He didn't look my way. His attorney whispered something, but his eyes, when they finally lifted, met mine for less than a second. I saw the old confidence falter, a brief flicker of someone realizing the script had turned against him. Judge Hale leaned forward. "Is this your voice, Mr. Graves?" No answer. The question hung, heavy as the scent in the room. "It's a simple confirmation," Hale continued, tone measured but not patient. "Your signature, your statement." Thomas cleared his throat. "That recording's manipulated." I let the silence after that sentence breathe until it hurt. Then I spoke. "The timestamp matches the dinner reservation confirmed by the restaurant, receipt entry R2E, and the transcript was authenticated by the Media Forensics Division. Every second of that audio exists in the record." My voice didn't shake, though I could feel the edges of emotion trying to rise. June sat in the back row, fingers laced tightly. She nodded once, small but deliberate. That was enough. Judge Hale turned to the clerk. "Read the relevant segment," she began. At approximately 9:43 p.m., subject, identified as Thomas Graves, states, quote, "The old woman signed, even if she doesn't remember," end quote. Another murmur, a soft cough, a shifting of guilt across the room. Thomas's lawyer objected, citing context, but the judge silenced him with a look that could quiet storms. "The recording will stand," he said. The air felt thicker after that, polish, sweat, and something else, the scent of justice in motion. I could almost taste it. He'd always believed control was permanence. That paper would hold his power longer than conscience ever could. But here, under oath, his own words were louder than his charm. The arbiter, the same man who had notarized my affidavit, stood by, silent observer turned anchor. He passed the sealed deed copy to the bench. "Verified signature comparison enclosed," he said. Hale accepted it, scanning the page, nodding once. "Forgery established," he declared quietly, "and motive clear." The gavel's handle twitched in his hand before falling still again. I could feel the tremor ripple through the crowd. For the first time, I let my shoulders ease. Thomas finally turned toward me, mouth opening as if to speak, but no sound came. That silence was worth every sleepless night. The judge's voice followed, firm but measured. "The court acknowledges the authenticity of the recording, transcript, and supporting exhibits. Proceedings for penalty assessment will commence in 48 hours. 48 hours. 2 exact numbers. Enough time for consequences to grow roots. The clerk gathered the evidence while the gallery watched in wordless awe. I stood still, breathing in the scent that had haunted me since the first hearing, varnish, polish, and faint sweat, but now it smelled like closure. As I turned to leave, a woman in the front row whispered, "She did it." Not in celebration, not in gossip, just recognition. Outside the courtroom, light spilled through the tall glass panes, warm and unfiltered. June joined me at the door. "You ready?" she asked. "I've been ready for years." Inside, the murmurs swelled again, then quieted as the gavel rose one final time. The sound cracked the air, absolute and final. The gavel fell once. Truth had sound. He smiled as if guilt were negotiable. The courtroom felt hotter than the day before, not the kind of heat you measure, but the kind that seeps under skin, where nerves live. The microphone stood between us like a line drawn in steel. He sat across from the witness stand, pretending calm, one hand resting lightly on a folded sheet of paper, the same way he used to rest his palm on my shoulder before a lie. Judge Hale adjusted his glasses. "Proceed with the cross-examination." Thomas leaned forward. "You claim this affidavit proves forgery, yet you never saw me sign anything, did you?" The witness, steady and precise, didn't flinch. "I didn't have to. The timestamps prove your access. The email trail references your initials within 48 hours of the original draft." He shifted in his seat. "That could be anyone's guess." "It's not a guess," she replied, voice even. "It's logged under entry ID C14. Same office server, same hour, same login pattern." The paper beneath his hand trembled once. I watched the sweat bloom along his collar, spreading in small half-moons. The air conditioning hummed weakly, struggling. Heat had become its own form of truth. It shows where people break. The prosecutor slid another document forward. "Mr. Graves, please read the highlighted section of your prior statement aloud." Thomas hesitated, then spoke, his voice tight. "I stated I wasn't present when the will was altered." "Correct," the prosecutor said. "Yet your verified phone log indicates a call from your office to the notary's direct line at 3:12 p.m. Same day, same hour." He swallowed. "Coincidence." The word hung there, fragile. The judge leaned in. "Coincidences are rare in matters of property law. Continue." I felt the silence stretch until it snapped. The witness turned another page. "This email," she said, "was sent from your account. Subject line, final draft attached. You confirmed the change. Signature aligned." "That's your phrasing, isn't it?" He stared at her, jaw tightening. "That's your phrasing, Mr. Graves?" He said nothing. The microphone caught the faint sound of his exhale, an admission shaped like air. The clerk marked the transcript. The faint scratch of pen against paper became louder than his denial. Judge Hale tapped the bench twice. "Mr. Graves, per Section 8.1 filing, the court issues a written notice of perjury consideration pending review." The gallery erupted, 2 sharp gasps, then a rising whisper. Hale's gavel fell once. "Order." The room stilled again, but the heat didn't leave. It pressed down harder. Thomas reached for the glass of water beside him, but his hand stopped halfway. The ice had melted. The condensation had pooled into a ring on the table. He watched it spread, his reflection warped in the ripple. I couldn't look away. The man who once convinced me silence was survival now tripped over his own sentences in public light. Justice, I realized, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it breathes through microphones and paper trails. The prosecutor resumed. "You've contradicted your sworn statement twice today. Would you like to correct it?" Thomas's voice faltered. "No corrections." "Then the record stands." Hale nodded toward the clerk. "Log the perjury review for morning docket." June, seated behind me, leaned forward slightly. "That's it," she whispered. "He's cornered." But I didn't move. The stakes were still suspended. Every lie he'd built, every manipulation disguised as charm, now reduced to ink, timestamp, and trembling hands. Thomas tried to recover. "You've built a case out of fragments," he said, forcing a smile. "Half-truths. People hear what they want." I spoke before the prosecutor could. "No, Thomas. They're hearing what you finally said." The air thinned around us. Even the light seemed harsher, unforgiving. The microphone between us caught everything. The scrape of his chair, the shallow hitch in his breathing. He looked at the affidavit on the table. The paper seemed to glow under the overhead bulbs, its surface warm from the heat of his hands. He tried to steady it, but the edges quivered. "Would you like to make a statement?" the judge asked. Thomas's lips parted. A beat, then 2. Nothing. Only the faint hum of the air vent and the slow rhythm of surrender. The clerk gathered the documents, sealing each in transparent sleeves. The sound of plastic meeting paper was crisp, final. Judge Hale stood. "The record is sufficient. We will adjourn for deliberation." Chairs scraped, Voices rose, then hushed. I stayed seated, staring at the space he'd just vacated. It felt lighter, emptied of power, but filled with something raw, truth taking shape where denial used to live. He turned as he passed me, face pale, eyes glassy. For a heartbeat, he seemed about to speak, to reclaim his old tone of superiority. But this time he didn't. He looked at me and finally blinked. When silence ends, justice speaks its own language. The courtroom held its breath, that strange quiet before sound learns to live again. The morning light cut through the tall windows, washing the wooden floor in pale gold. Even the flag behind the bench seemed to move before the air did, its slow flutter like the pulse of a nation deciding what truth looked like. Judge Hale lifted the verdict sheet, his tone level but his eyes softer than before. This court finds the defendant, Thomas Graves, guilty of forgery and misrepresentation. The words fell like stones into still water. One by one, ripples reached every corner of the room. A woman gasped. Someone whispered, "Finally!" I gripped the edge of my sleeve so tightly it left a mark. The clerk read the formal entry, her voice trembling slightly. Verdict entered and recorded under order reference A391. The flag moved again, brushing softly against the wooden staff. Light shimmered across its folds, bright, decisive. Thomas stood motionless. His lawyer leaned close, whispering something that died halfway to his ear. He didn't respond. The arrogance that had once held entire rooms now looked small, almost borrowed. He turned slightly, searching for a face that would still defend him. There were none left. June sat 2 rows behind me, hands clasped, eyes fixed forward. When the clerk finished reading, she whispered, "It's over." But she was wrong. It wasn't over. It was beginning. Justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't end anything. It reorders the ruins. Judge Hale's voice cut through the murmur. Sentence will be scheduled within 10 days. The court commends the claimant for her persistence under considerable adversity. He paused, meeting my gaze. Truth often travels a longer road than deceit, but it arrives intact. Those words stayed with me, even as the gavel struck once. The sound was sharp, final, and yet oddly kind. Thomas looked down at the verdict sheet, his hand twitching as if he could rewrite it by will alone. "This isn't justice," he muttered under his breath. But the microphone caught it, and for a fleeting second his voice echoed back across the speakers, an accidental confession, stripped of all control. The crowd reacted, 3 distinct murmurs rising and falling in rhythm. "Her name," someone said, "not his." Then again, louder. "Her name, not his." The chant built, not of celebration, but of reclamation. I didn't move. My eyes blurred, tears distorting the light into prisms. The edges of the flag glowed white, bending brightness into memory. I remembered every door slammed in my face, every letter unanswered, every polite lie told in the name of patience. The light reached me last, soft, warm, final. Thomas was escorted out first. He didn't look back. Perhaps he knew that silence no longer belonged to him. June came to stand beside me, resting a hand on my shoulder. "You did it," she said quietly. "You didn't just prove it. You changed it." I looked at the empty chair where he'd sat through every denial, every twist. "No," I said. "The truth did." The bailiff began clearing the courtroom, voices fading into the corridor's hum. Outside the tall windows, the afternoon brightened into something almost forgiving. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to explain myself to the light. Judge Hale stepped down from the bench, removing his glasses. "You may collect the certified order within the hour," he told me, his tone softer now. "The record will bear your name as rightful owner." My name, simple, unadorned, restored not by sentiment, but by evidence. June smiled. "Do you want to stay a moment?" "I need to," I said, "just until the echo fades." We stood in the fading hum of justice, papers rustling, footsteps dimming, sunlight climbing higher. The flag behind the bench swayed once more, slow and deliberate, like a final nod toward truth. I walked forward, fingertips grazing the railing, grounding myself in the place where lies had finally unraveled. The verdict sheet lay on the clerk's table, signed and sealed. My reflection flickered faintly in the glass frame above it. I whispered to no one. He wrote my name once to erase me. The air shifted, the flag whispering in response. Now it was mine again. My name was mine again. Restoration doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like breath. The county office smelled of dust and polished wood, that quiet scent of places where signatures outlive people. Sunlight cut narrow rectangles across the counter, landing on the brass nameplate that had once felt like a wall between me and what was mine. Today, it looked smaller. The clerk recognized me as soon as I entered. "You're here for the reinstatement," she said softly, as if the word itself might break. I nodded. She turned to a stack of bound files, the weight of bureaucracy wrapped in paper and patience. "Judge Hale signed the final order this morning. It's official." Her hand slid a document across the counter, thick, embossed, real. The texture under my fingers was rough where it should have been smooth, the kind of imperfection that only truth leaves behind. That single page carried months of noise, waiting, disbelief. It carried nights where even hope had to whisper. I ran my thumb along the corner. "Feels heavier than before." The clerk smiled faintly. "Real things do." Behind her, the registry wall was lined with ledgers, rows of spines stamped in fading gold, every entry a life crossed by numbers and property lines. The gatekeeper, my steadfast ally through it all, stood near the back, reading one final record before nodding my way. "It's balanced now," he said. "The old deed's null. The new one carries your name, unchallenged." He handed me the receipt entry, stamped reference D2F. For the first time in years, the system's language worked for me instead of against me. Outside, the afternoon light pressed against the glass door. The air was warm, carrying that faint hum of summer traffic from Main Street. I looked back once before leaving, the clerk still organizing papers, her motions rhythmic, unhurried. Institutions move slowly, but sometimes they move right. "Do you want a copy certified?" she asked. "No," I said. "I just want to take it home." She nodded, understanding more than procedure required. When I stepped outside, the door closed behind me with a soft thud. Final, but not abrupt. The sound echoed like punctuation after a sentence I'd rewritten myself. The town square lay ahead, unchanged. The courthouse clock read 3:47, its hands steady now, no longer mocking the endless waiting. I paused beneath the same flagpole where months ago I'd stood with trembling hands and unsigned papers. Today, I carried proof. The gatekeeper caught up beside me. "Strange, isn't it?" he said. "After everything, it just comes down to paper and ink." "Not strange," I replied. "Fitting. He used paper to take it. I used paper to reclaim it." He laughed quietly, then grew thoughtful. "You could file a damages claim. You'd win." "I don't want more. I just want what's mine." He nodded once, knowing better than to argue. Some debts are moral, some are emotional, and some no ledger can settle. At home, the front gate creaked open with the same stubborn sound it always had. The path was lined with weeds I hadn't had the heart to pull while the trial dragged on. But now, every step felt lighter. Inside, the rooms were quiet, but not empty. Sunlight, soft and filtered, fell across the same table where I'd once written desperate letters no one answered. The new certificate lay flat upon it, the seal catching the light. My name shimmered faintly under it, embossed, unshakable. I traced the letters, one by one. They looked simple, ordinary even, but the paper beneath them had texture, like skin, like history, like something earned. The gatekeeper stayed near the doorway. "You'll sleep better now," he said. "Maybe," I replied. "But peace has its own sound. You have to get used to it." He left soon after, closing the door gently. The echo stayed for a moment, fading into the heartbeat of the house. I walked through each room slowly, running my hand along the walls. The paint was cracked in places, the windows slightly warped from years of heat and neglect. But it was mine. Every imperfection, every silent corner. By the window, the late afternoon light shifted again, softer now, almost forgiving. I exhaled. For months I had been fighting to breathe. Now, breath was all that remained. Justice had spoken in court, fairness had signed its name, but restoration was quiet. It didn't shout. It simply let me exist again. I folded the certificate once, careful not to crease the seal, and placed it in the small drawer beside the door, the same drawer where the false deed once hid. The circle closed with a click. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, faint and even. I sat by the window, watching the last light fall across the yard, and thought about all that had been lost to silence, to fear, to paper. Some things come back, some never do. But memory keeps its own accounts. Home sounds different when it stops defending itself. For the first time in years, the house greeted me without protest. No creak from the floorboards that once echoed my unrest. No sigh from the walls heavy with unspoken things. Just quiet, the kind that didn't accuse, didn't demand. The steady sound of the old clock filled the air again, each tick a measured mercy. I stood by the window where everything once began, where betrayal had first drawn its shadow across the morning light. Now the same window light slipped across the table like forgiveness in motion, soft and diffused. Dust motes floated through it like slow confessions finally released. The journal lay open beside a cold cup of tea. My handwriting looked calmer, smaller. I wrote, "Forgiveness isn't about him, it's about reclaiming time." The ink bled faintly through the page, spreading like breath on glass. I'd spent $42 on this notebook 6 months ago, thinking it would hold proof. Instead, it held healing. The clock struck 4. 4. How many days I'd once counted between hearings, between letters unanswered. 4 years since peace had last sounded ordinary. I smiled, just a little. Some wounds don't close, they settle. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. The protector, my quiet ally through it all, leaned in from the doorway. "You keeping busy again?" he asked. "Trying," I said, closing the journal gently. "It's strange. The silence feels honest now." He nodded. "That's what truth does. It empties noise." We both watched the light shift against the wall, slow and certain. The ring on my finger caught it. Still the same plain band I'd refused to remove, even when everything else fell apart. Its surface, once dulled by grief, glinted again, alive with color. "I almost sold this," I admitted. He raised a brow. "Why didn't you?" "Because it wasn't his memory I wanted to keep. It was mine." He smiled. "Then you kept the right thing." The moment stretched, gentle and complete. When he left, the house didn't feel empty. It felt settled, like a hand finally unclenched. I returned to my chair, tracing the ring's edge, the faint sound of the clock keeping rhythm with my breath. Outside, a neighbor's laughter drifted faintly through the open window. It sounded ordinary, unremarkable, perfect. For so long, I'd feared normalcy would mean forgetting. But now I understood. Normalcy was survival, disguised as peace. I picked up the pen again, writing slower this time. "I forgive the years that hurt me for existing." The words didn't sting. They just landed and stayed. Light moved across the room again, touching the photo frame still resting on the mantel. I didn't flinch at it anymore. The frame held no ghosts now, just context. The house no longer defended itself from memory. It absorbed it. The window light dimmed as the sun turned low. I rose, opened the window, and let the cool air spill in. The house inhaled with me. I whispered, almost to the air itself. We made it through. A single echo answered back in the ticking of the clock, faithful, grounded, alive. I let it keep talking for me, 1 second at a time. On the page, the last line I wrote read simply, "Peace requires participation." The ring gleamed faintly as I set the pen down. Outside, the first stars were beginning to pierce the evening sky. I didn't wish on them this time. I didn't need to. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't sound like surrender. It sounds like the house breathing again. And I stopped listening for apologies. Every ending deserves a signature of its own. The morning light spilled across my desk, the same kind of light that once caught the forged signature that began it all. Only this time, it wasn't exposure. It was invitation. I turned the page of the local paper, the ink still faintly damp. The headline stretched across the fold. "Take her name off the documents." My breath caught, not because it hurt, but because it resonated. Those were his words, years ago, spoken with quiet arrogance. Now, printed in public view, they belonged to a different truth. The journalist had written everything with precision: dates, hearings, evidence. She even included a reference, entry D6B, noting the institutional order that restored the estate and corrected the record. But between her paragraphs, she'd left space for tone, for what law couldn't measure. The pen that rested beside me gleamed softly, catching the light in the same way it had when I'd first signed away trust. Its weight felt the same, but what it carried now was mine alone. I picked it up, tracing its body with my thumb, the small indentation where my grip had worn the finish over years of holding on too tightly. "I used to think a name could be stolen," I whispered. "Now I know it can only be misplaced." The witness, my steadfast ally through all those months of cross-examination and silent proofs, stood near the window. "The Foundation's papers arrived this morning," she said, setting a folder down beside the newspaper. "They need your signature before noon." I smiled faintly. Another document. Another beginning. "You're not just signing this one for you," she said gently. "You're signing it for every woman who was told her name didn't belong to her." I nodded, the truth of it sinking deeper than the ink ever could. Outside, the hum of the street felt different, alive, expectant. Somewhere in that noise, a child laughed. Somewhere, another woman would read that headline and know she wasn't alone. The charter lay open, its title simple, unpretentious: Foundation for Legal Restoration and Identity Rights. I wrote my name slowly, each letter deliberate, the pen scratching against the paper with the finality of healing. The sound itself became the sense anchor, the texture of transformation. When I lifted the pen, a line of light crossed the signature. Not harsh, not blinding, just clear. "Looks official," the witness said, but there was warmth behind her professionalism. "It looks alive," I replied. "It looks like me." We stood for a moment in silence, both watching how the light fell across the ink. "Will you give a statement?" she asked. "The press wants a quote for tomorrow's feature." I thought for a long moment before answering. "Just print this. Justice doesn't end in court. It begins when silence ends." She smiled, nodded, and gathered the papers. As she left, her reflection caught briefly in the mirror hanging across the room. I saw myself behind her, not as I was at the start, frightened, uncertain, but steady, whole. I walked closer to the mirror. The glass reflected both the pen in my hand and the article behind me on the table, past and present balanced within the same frame. For a moment, I whispered the vow I'd once made in anger. He thought I'd never read. Then, with a soft laugh that surprised even me, I added the ending it always needed. But I wrote instead. The light shifted once more, sliding across the surface of the mirror, landing on my face before fading toward evening. Outside, I could hear the city breathing, the low hum of traffic blending with distant conversation. Life continuing, unguarded. The foundation office would open tomorrow. There would be meetings, interviews, maybe even cameras. But this moment, this stillness, was the true close. I placed the pen down beside the newspaper, aligning it with quiet care. The reflection in the mirror no longer looked like survival. It looked like authorship. I whispered, almost reverently, "This time, the ink belongs to me." And for the first time in my life, I didn't doubt the truth of it. I write my name myself,